Good morning. I'm Zach Pennington. I'm from Louisville, but I now live in Austin, Texas. But I've been in Startup Weekend since 2011, I think was my first one I participated in. And I've been a participant probably half a dozen times, an organizer half a dozen times, and also a facilitator half a dozen times. So I think I've done 15 to 20 startup weekends in some capacity, and I love it. And I'm excited that you guys are here today and this weekend, and thank you for having me. So I'm going to talk about customer discovery. Customer discovery has become a bit of a buzzword in the startup community in the last couple of years. And it's really just a fancy way to describe asking questions, right? A specific type of questions to a specific subset of people. So let's get into that here. So I like to think of it as asking questions of hypothetical or potential customers to test our hypotheses about who they are, who the customers are as far as like demographics and psychographics, what problems they might have, and then how bad they want to solve those problems, right? How big are these pain points for them? To differentiate that, customer discovery is not market research in terms of like getting industry reports or, big data surveys, things like that. It's not sales. It's not trying to sell anything. And it's also not product feedback. So it's not putting a product in front of someone and then getting their opinion on it. All three of those things are super important and should be done at some point in the journey or in the process, but those things all come after customer discovery. So customer discovery is a really good place to start. Historically, I like to do a little bit of Googling and a little bit of customer discovery anytime I have a new idea and want to get some feedback and see if it's even worth putting my mental energy into the idea. And if you're like me, which if you're here, you probably are, I probably have 100 ideas a month. Maybe 3 of them are good, and I got to figure out which 3 are even worth thinking about, right? And so customer discovery is a great way to do that. All right. So now that we know what it is, let's talk about who you should be asking these questions, right? So when you're trying to do customer discovery, you're trying to find people, right? And it's always people. I guess you could ask pets if you know how to talk to like dogs and horses and stuff, but anyone you think or hypothesize, right? We're testing our hypotheses that has the problem that you are trying to solve, right? The biggest mistake that I see a lot of people make in both pitching and ultimately in customer discovery, or a lack of customer discovery, is they think that their product is for everyone. And there turns out that no product or service is for everyone. In fact, if you went outside right now and stood on the corner and handed out $20 bills to every person who walked by and said free money, 100% of the people that walked by you wouldn't take the money from you. Think about that, right? That's crazy. Handing away free money is not a product for everyone, right? A lot of people wouldn't trust it. A lot of people would think you're doing something shady, or, maybe they're worried about getting a disease and it's not worth $20 to get sick, right? So if handing away free money isn't for everyone, then chances are your product or service is also not for everyone, right? So you really have to narrow in, as Grant mentioned earlier, try to start broad, but get more and more specific about who you think has this problem. Another mistake I see a lot of people do with this is they focus too much on demographics, and demographics would be things like age, gender, ethnicity, location, education level, income level, etc., and not enough on psychographics, which are behaviors, beliefs, and thought patterns that people have in common. So for example, gamers have more in common with each other than people in their 40s might, right? Depending on the product you're selling. Or devout Christians might have a different set of beliefs and behaviors than just women, right? So trying to narrow in on the shared behaviors, shared beliefs, and kind of shared activities and thoughts is a better way to narrow people down. So if you say people who love technology or who are early adopters of technology, that's actually a better group of people to go after than just teenagers, right? Because not all teenagers love technology, or not all 20-somethings love technology. So when you're focusing on the groups, think about that. And then obviously they have this shared problem, which is the ultimate thing that unites them. When you're looking for people, you want to kind of prioritize a couple different groups of people. One would be strangers. So people you don't know. The best kinds of strangers for me are typically friends of friends, because you can get a warm introduction to them and they'll be, you know, polite and give you time, but they don't know you well enough to kind of know what to tell you or tell you what you want to hear. And then also, if your product or service is solving a business problem, it's good to talk to people who actually work in or own businesses that have that problem, right? So if you're trying to sell a medical device, for example, it'd be good to talk to doctors, but it's also good to talk to hospital administrators, right? Or the CFO of a hospital, because they make a lot of decisions about how money is spent and what problems they prioritize. So don't just think about the end user of the product. You also have to think about who would buy the product or who has the pain or the financial, you know, budget or pain to solve, right? Deprioritize friends and family. Now, that said, if you have friends and family who are perfectly in your target demographic, you don't have to ignore them entirely, right? So let's say your best friend's dad owns a car dealership and you're working on a product for car dealers, right? That would be a great person to talk to. So just because you know them doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to them. However, if you're going after something a little more basic or broad, like a smartphone app, asking your mom or your grandmother for feedback is not nearly as valuable as asking a stranger or a friend of a friend, right? Does that make sense? And then obviously don't go after people who don't have the problem, right? If you're trying to make a food bank for people who are, you know, food insecure, and then you go and you talk to your friend who is a multimillionaire about like what are their problems finding food, it's probably not a good conversation to have. It's probably a waste of customer discovery time, right? And then a lot of people ask where a good place to find these people. Well, obviously during a pandemic, a lot of the suggestions I typically give would be to go out to malls or go to parks or, you know, events that are going on, but obviously we're not going to do that. And so I would look at joining Facebook groups or other message boards, subreddits, etc. People love being asked for their opinion. And in the way that they hate being sold stuff, it's like the opposite, right? If you say, hey, can I sell you my product or tell you my idea? Like most people are very averse to that. But if you say, hey, can I get your opinion on something, or can I ask for your feedback, or can I learn about what you do? Most people are very excited. Like no one asks for your feedback normally, right? And so that's a good way to do it, is to go in these groups. And then of course I mentioned earlier, friends of friends or you know, family connections. Asking for referrals is a great way to do this. So what I might do is, if I had a lot of Facebook friends or Instagram or what have you, I would say, does anyone know someone who blank, right? Has this problem or has this job or, you know, likes this hobby or interest? Because it's not who you know, it's who they know, right? And so asking for those referrals are great. For example, I can't think off the top of my head someone who is like into dirt biking, right? But I know statistically, I know people who are into dirt biking. So I might just say, hey, are any of my friends know someone who's really into dirt biking? I'd love to get their opinion. And statistically, you know, I don't know, a couple thousand Facebook friends, like they know 50 people that are into dirt biking, right? So that's just, again, a really easy ask. You're not asking for a lot. And again, you're not selling anything. Okay, so now you've identified who you're going to talk to and how you're going to get in front of these people. How should you ask questions to these people? Well, I've chosen the mediums that are best to interview people in, kind of best to worst, right? So typically in person is best, because the best thing that happens in person is the conversation is the most natural, and you get to pick up on things like body language, facial cues, micro expressions, and stuff like that. That stuff's really important, because people will say one thing and do another, and we tend to react emotionally to most things before we act logically. So if you're explaining something to someone and they look confused, or they look upset, or they get really excited when you mention something, like picking up on those cues is super, super important, and in person is the best way to do that. That said, the next best thing is video chat, right? Because again, seeing someone's facial expressions, hearing their tone of voice matched with that body language, you know, if they're like, yeah, no, rollerblades, sure, yeah, they're great, you know, like picking up on that is really important. And then again, phone call, not as good, because you miss the facial and body language, but you do get the tone of voice. text, you know, as we all know, there's a really great Key and Peele skit about this. Text tone interpretation is kind of hard via text. So someone might be like, yeah, that's a great idea. And you might read it as like, yeah, that's a great idea. Right. So that's why email and text convos aren't great. It's a good way to set up the meeting, right? Hey man, can I ask you a few questions, right? Like text people or slide into their DMs or what have you, but get them on the phone, get them on Zoom, get them on FaceTime, right? And then surveys. Please don't do surveys. If you do a survey, use the survey as a funnel to do all the other things, right? So it's okay to put out a quick survey with like 2 or 3 questions to say, do you have this problem? You know, how big of a problem is it for you? And can I contact you for more info? That's a really great use of a survey, because you can post that on Facebook and collect a bunch of feedback overnight. But that's not actual feedback. That's just leads for feedback, right? Or for customer discovery. So I don't love surveys. As someone who's taken a lot of surveys, you know, you probably know, like halfway through, you're just like, I just want the Amazon gift card, like just click 3 on everything, right? So again, use that as lead capture, but not as actual evidence. And then again, you're asking permission about learning about the other person. You're not selling them something. You're not trying to convince them to do anything other than talk to you. And one of the best ways to do this is to be honest in saying that you are a student and this is for educational purposes, right? Because that's what Startup Weekend is. This is a business education experience, right? It's a very hands-on experience, and it's more akin to real life than like going to a business class in school would be. But at the end of the day, like, we're all students here. We're all learning something and practicing. So it's okay to say, hey, I'm taking a seminar this weekend and I'm looking to talk to people to learn something for that, you know, or I'm a student. And you could, if you're actively a student, then you don't have to even clarify that, right? Again, you're not selling anything. And a lot of people ask, you know, the answers should be confidential, right? You're going to share the answers with your teammates, and you're going to share the insights with the judges and whoever else. But you're not going to say like Mike DeCenso said that, you know, the first time he got, you know, herpes or whatever, this was all the problems he had with that, right? You're not going to like share personal medical information with someone. Mike, I love Mikey's face right now. He's got, yeah, take the mask down. There you go. That was a hypothetical example, but it's true, right? Like, you might ask people some really sensitive stuff, like, you know, tell me about the last time you ran out of money, right? And then being like, oh man, that guy, you know, Grant overdrafts his checking account every other week. It's like, okay, well, thanks for busting me out in public like that, right? So instead saying, you know, of the people we talked to, these are the things we learned, right? Okay, so last but not least, or I guess second to last but not least, what questions should you ask? All right, so we know customer discovery is all about asking questions. We know that we're going to talk to people who have shared problems, behaviors, and interests. And we know that we're going to, you know, come at them as a student for educational purposes. Yeah, dude, trust me, I'm rolling in Startup Weekend money too. That's what paid for everything you see behind me, was all the free Startup Weekends I did. Yeah. And we know who we're going to go after and how we're going to ask questions. So these are the questions we should ask. So Grant kind of mentioned this earlier, but you want to ask open-ended questions, or kind of start broad and then narrow in. So an open-ended question would be, what are your favorite things to do on the weekends, right? A closed question would be, do you like the Hunger Games, right? Because the answer is yes or no. So that's a closed question. When there's like a finite, simple answer, like how many times a day do you take a nap, is a closed question, right? But if you say, what are your thoughts on taking naps? That's an open question, okay? You want to ask questions about the past and past behavior, right? So for example, if you were to ask me, how much am I going to work out this coming week? The answer would be 3 to 5 times, right? And then if you were to ask me, how many times did I work out this last week? The answer would be 0 times, right? And the reality is, we're very delusional about our aspirational and future selves, right? Like, oh yeah, I would save a bunch of money for retirement. Oh yeah, I will eat better. Oh, I will buy a house or whatever. But then past behaviors indicate otherwise, right? And so you're trying to ask about their actual behavior. So saying, you know, tell me about the last time, these are, you know, in example questions, right? That's talking about the past, not the future. Asking about pain or problems is different than asking about hope or solutions. Unfortunately, people tend to prioritize solving their pain points more than, again, these aspirational or like extremely positive things. So, I might want to own a $5,000 gym example, like one of those tonal digital gym things that I keep seeing Instagram ads for. Aspirationally, I want to own that. But the reality is, like, if my plumbing breaks, I need to solve that, right? Like, that's not an option. Like, that's a big pain for me. And I've spent several $1,000s on plumbing and $0,000 on gym equipment, right? So people tend to prioritize their pain. And so asking about how painful that is important. Someone might say, yeah, that's a real issue for me. And then when you ask them, what have you done to try to solve that issue? They'll be like, well, nothing at all. And you're like, so clearly it's not that big of an issue, right? And then again, kind of to Grant's earlier point about starting broad and going specific, one easy way to do that is called 5 whys. And the number 5, I think, is just catchy or clever, but it's really just asking why or getting at the root cause. So again, going back to the example of the gym, if I said, I didn't go to the gym this last week, you could just take that at surface value and be like, okay, Zach hates fitness or whatever, right? But if you said, why didn't you go to the gym this week? And I'd say, well, it was a global pandemic going on. And you go, oh, okay, well, why didn't you work out at home? Well, I don't have the equipment that I want at home. Well, why don't you have any equipment at your house? Well, I can't really find any. Well, why can't you find it? Right. So you're trying to get at the core problem. And if the core problem is, I just don't give a shit, then that's fine. But the core problem might be, there isn't gym equipment that's $30 that I can find online that accomplishes what I need. Like, I don't have the money to buy what I need, or I don't know where to find it. Right. So you're really trying to get at the core of the problem and not just the surface. So I mentioned some good question examples, like, tell me about the last time you did X. And I chose that example because it sounds like I'm asking about drug use. You can say, what did you not like about it? Right. So you can say, like, it lasted too long and, I was profusely sweating the entire time. Another good example is, what is the biggest problem you face when doing Y? Why is it a problem, and how would you do it differently? So another good form of customer discovery is asking people how they would solve their problems, because that might give you some insights on creating a solution. You might think there's the specific way to solve it, but if everyone's like, man, if only someone would do, this thing or that thing to solve this problem for me, I just don't have the resources to do it myself. That's a huge business, especially when you look at business to business stuff. A lot of businesses know how they want to solve their problems. They're just in the business of doing something else. Right. And a lot of big businesses came from businesses solving their own problem and then realizing that they had a lot of customers who needed that. Like Trello was an example of that, right? Fog Creek Software needed a really easy Kanban board. And so they built one and they're like, oh, this is dope. Maybe we should like sell this to other people. Slack, I think, was another example of that, right? So a lot of people can't solve their own problems, but they know how to solve them, right? So, take your customers' feedback very seriously. And then again, I mentioned pain points. Prioritizing. One of the things I like to say to people is, we'll be talking about an issue that we're having or argument or something, and inevitably it'll come up where I'm like, on the list of 100 problems that I have, like, this is problem 95, right? Like, I have so many other things that I'd rather solve. So getting a gauge for, like, is this a daily problem? Is this a weekly problem? Are you actively trying to solve it? We'll tell you something, because everyone, like, I think of a great example. Everyone has the cell phone battery life problem, right? Almost everyone's cell phone battery life is less than it could be or should be or whatever. But the reality is, only probably 5% of people have ever bought like an external battery to take with them places, right? Because the other 95% of people aren't actively trying to solve that problem. They're just going to bitch about it and not do anything about it because it doesn't actually matter, right? It's maybe slightly inconvenient once a quarter, right? But if you're a mobile salesperson and you're on the phone all day and you're driving to and from places, those people have the Mophie cases and the extra battery pack and 5 chargers in their car, right? So asking about how big that problem is a really, really good indicator of whether or not there's an opportunity for the business there. I can't keep up with the chat, but I'll check it later. I see you guys blowing up, so clearly I'm doing something right. Okay. And then the flip side, bad questions would be like, would you buy this, right? Aspirational, future looking questions. Would you buy a jetpack? The answer is yes, right? Sure. Why not? How much would you spend? That's a good question to ask later. But even that question is kind of dumb because people will tell you a different number than the reality. The best way to test how much money someone would spend on something is to put it on the internet, put a price on it, and let people try to check out and then see how many people actually buy it and put their credit card in, right? But asking someone, how much would you spend for a jetpack? And they're like, $5,000. And then you're like, cool, give me your credit card. And they're like, oh, no, I wouldn't actually do that, right? And then the last one is, do you like ice cream? So I call these ice cream questions. I think I got it from someone else, but it's basically kind of like the jetpack question, except it's basically just asking questions that don't tell you anything, right? Everyone likes ice cream. I know that's not true, but it's like 98% of people, right? And so why even ask that question? Like, if I could give you a way to have all of your debt wiped out for free, would you do it? And people are like, yeah. And you're like, genius. And it's like, no shit. Everyone would do that. That's not like, why even ask that question? Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, don't ask questions that are obviously have an answer, right? Ask hard questions and specific questions, right? Do you wish you were in better shape? Like, who doesn't? You know, marathon running athletes wish they were in better shape, right? Everyone wishes they were healthier, right? Don't ask questions where the answer is always yes or always no. It's a waste of a question. Okay. So last but not least, what should you do with these answers, right? So that's kind of what Startup Weekend's all about, is you do something and then you got, check off one task and now you have 5 more, right? So the first thing you want to do is, I think Grant mentioned this as well, you're looking for patterns and trends within the answers, right? And again, this is qualitative research, so I'm not expecting you to do 500 customer discovery interviews, right? But if you do 10, you'll start to see some patterns. If you do 20, you'll probably see more patterns. If you do 50, you'll definitely see some patterns, right? If you don't see any patterns in your answers, you're probably asking the wrong questions or you're talking to the wrong people, right? Because people are, there's 7 billion of us, but we are fairly homogenous. We have a lot of shared goals, shared interests, shared problems. And if you can't find anything in common with the people you're talking to, again, you're talking to the wrong people. You want to prioritize the people, the patterns and the people who are the most excited or had the most pain for what you're talking about, right? A lot of startups think that they're solving a problem for one group and find out that they're solving it for another, right? That's a really common issue. I know the company I work for is Switcher Studio. I don't think that we had set out to create a product that would solve a lot of problems for churches and houses of worship. We were trying to solve a problem for a lot of like video producers and people like that. And it turns out that churches and houses of worship need good live streaming video, software and equipment on a budget, right? They all have that problem, or most of them have that problem, right? So don't just like assume your customer is one group. Like, go towards the group that is latching on to, again, the problem you're trying to solve. A good thing to do is ask for permission to follow up. So I mentioned that this isn't sales or product feedback, but guess what? If you talk to someone and they seem like someone who might buy or give you product feedback in the future, don't just like burn that lead. Don't just burn that bridge, right? Say, this was so valuable. If we keep working on this, do you care if I follow up to get more feedback from you? And most people, especially if they have that problem or pain point and interested in it, will say yes. And that's your initial email list right there, right? Check out my new MVP that we made the day after I got your feedback, right? And then if you see the pattern and you see the trend and you see the problems, build an MVP that you think solves those problems, or the right ones, right? Don't just build what you thought you would build, but take that feedback to heart. Think about, what are you actually trying to solve, and solve that with your MVP. If you don't see a trend, or you don't see a pattern, or you see one but you don't like it, right? Where it's like, oh, I thought we were going to come up with a great way to, sell clothes online, but it seems like the problem everyone has is finding a good place to buy barbecue, right? That could be the trend, but you could just say, I don't want to build a barbecue finding app, right? I want to do something else. If that's the case, then choose a new group of people to go after, or choose a new problem, right? Because typically there's product market fit is what they call it often, but I think it's problem person fit. And so if those things aren't happening, if you're not getting people to fit, you either change the people or you change the problem, right? And a lot of people sometimes think it's, oh, the problem doesn't exist. And oftentimes it's you're asking the wrong people. So yeah, so those are all of my ramblings of a madman. So I'd love to, Mikey said we have about 11 minutes for questions. So I'm going to look here in the chat. Yeah, respect people's time. Exactly. That's what this is all about, right? You want to get as much value from them as you can without sucking their souls and their value out of them, right? Because they're doing you a favor at the end of the day. Cool. So does anyone have any audio questions that they want to hop on and ask? Or
there's a couple of things I want to add to Zach's points. Number one, why did he say he didn't like surveys? And I think you kind of got to the point of it in the later slides, but because you want to have candid conversation. You want to understand, the whole purpose of customer discovery is you understand the pains of these potential customers. You are not asking the questions to validate your potential solution. You want to understand the root cause of the problems. And that's why Zach was going into why. That's called the 5 why and root cause analysis. You want to understand what the true pains are so that you can then approach that problem. Don't make a solution for a Band-Aid. You want to solve the root cause. Another thing Zach mentioned, and that really goes to the entirety of why we do customer discovery, is you don't want to spend 4 or 5 years on a project just to find, and tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars just to find out you don't have any customers at the end of the day. You just wasted time and money, right? And so when you are asking questions, make sure that you are not trying to just validate your own solution. You might have pitched Train Tracker, but that might be Ice Cream Truck Tracker by the end of the day, right? So just a point to make you understand why customer discovery is so important. Don't be afraid to iterate. Don't be afraid to pivot. You're trying to solve the root cause of problems because you know that at the end of the day is what's going to sell products or services.